Hi, I'm Chris Naniga, the Director of Training Development at SwiftOtter, and you're watching a free lesson from our BigCommerce Front-end Foundations training course, the most extensive and in-depth learning experience available to turn you into an expert on BigCommerce's default front-end framework. If you like what you see in this lesson, see below for the link to the full course. On the topic of stencil objects, I'm actually going to start with the technique that you can employ that allows you to inspect the full dictionary of objects and values available to your templates when a given page is rendered. That's pretty much going to be an indispensable tool for you as you're developing in Stencil, and getting familiar with it now will allow you to kind of follow along and observe the data on your own pages as we are discussing different stencil object topics in the coming lessons. This is done in your development environment with a query string parameter called debug. This will not work in a production environment, but in a local environment where your pages are being served by the Stencil CLI server, you can append to your URL this query string parameter called debug that can have the value context or bar, and both of those will trigger a mode that lets you inspect all of the different values and objects available on your page. I'll show you in my own environment here exactly what this query string parameter does and the difference between those two values. So here I am on a product page in my Stencil local environment, and if I add that debug parameter onto the URL with, first we'll try the context value, debug equals context, then what I get back from the server instead of a web page is in fact just a JSON response that has all of the data that this page can see, all of the data that was passed in by BigCommerce. Here we have settings, head, breadcrumbs. If we look further down here, here's the main product object. So this is everything that's available will just come back as a JSON response just by appending that query string parameter to the URL. Now, I will note this isn't always going to be the prettiest way to view this information and inspect it unless you are using the right browser extension like I am here for kind of prettifying this JSON information. This would just kind of be a one long vomited string if I wasn't using that browser extension. So you might want to consider the same thing, or there's other techniques that you can use as well, which I'll get into here in a second. First, let's see what the other value for the debug parameter does. We're going to change this to bar instead of context. When you use this value, the response that you get actually is the full web page, like you would get with the naked URL, but it also includes this formatted version of that entire JSON, just like we were just looking at. So that's what I'm seeing here up here at the top of my page. But if I scroll all the way past all of this, you can see that this actually is also loading my full web page. So this is kind of a hybrid view. So the way that you use this query string parameter is up to you. You could simply use this hybrid view on a regular basis as you're developing. Although if your JSON information is going to show up there at the top of the page, that's probably going to inhibit that quite a bit. One thing to note, if you are using this debug bar value on a regular basis, is at least at the time that I'm recording this, there is a bit of a peculiarity with the rendered page. The links that I have on my page, instead of linking properly to my local host version of those pages, actually are being rendered with the live store URL. So you see I clicked on that link and I ended up on a URL in my actual BigCommerce store. So just be aware of that if you're using debug bar, not to try to navigate around and expect to stay on your local environment. You'll kind of have to back up and append that query string parameter with each page that you navigate to. Another technique that you might consider using, of course, is to just keep the debug equals context version of a page open in a separate browser tab. Or if you are accustomed to using an app like Postman, if you use an app like that for a lot of API testing and you're very comfortable with it, you might find it convenient to keep your debug context version of a specific page open in Postman to reference that and the tools that it has for cleanly dealing with a JSON response. What I like to do is it depends on exactly what I need the inspection information for at a given time. But for just kind of quick access to the available context objects at any given time, while I'm actually browsing to my page, I tend to just use the console to fetch the current URL with that query string parameter appended, and then I'm able to see that information in the response and interact with it and manipulate it in my console. So I could just fetch the current location and add on the debug equals context. Oops. Like that. This, if you're not familiar with fetch, that returns a promise. With the response object that is passed in there, we just need the to call the JSON method to take that response object and actually get the JSON response body off of that as an object, and then I can just take that that JSON object and log that out, just like this. So I'll just kind of keep this as a snippet that I can throw in there no matter what page I'm on, and just immediately get a response back here in my console and be able to inspect that at the same time that I'm viewing and working with my page. Of course, there are some pages, if we just search for something here, some pages that already have query string parameters, so you just want to be careful about that. Like the search page here already has the search query string parameter, so I would just want to make sure to adjust this appropriately with that ampersand instead of a question mark to get the proper response. So that's the basics of how to fully inspect the data that's available to you on a given page. I would encourage you to just make that a standard practice, to be able to accurately see exactly what data is available to you instead of trying to guess about it and just cross-reference the documentation. Just pick a workflow that works smoothly for you. Whether it's a separate app, a separate browser tab, or using the console like I just did, pick a workflow and just make regular use of that as you are working in your templates.